Hey, everybody, I am Don Purdom, the Conservative Era. It is great to be with my good friend, Larry DeMarco. Hey, Larry, I am so excited to be doing this with you. I think this is going to be great for people to see how those of us from different sides of the aisle think and contrast in a way that people can absorb content and be able to think about issues.
Don, I'm also excited about being here with you today. I have been wanting to do this, especially when we've seen each other online and we've hit a really exciting topic or that we've each had a strong opinion about, but yet we still have enough in common that we can do this. So I'm excited to bring this to the internet audience.
Well, and along that line, again, I'm Don Purdom. I'm a conservative political analyst. I've got a master's degree from George Washington University in political management. I've worked on numerous Republican congressional campaigns, both and Senate campaigns at the state level as well. And I've had a lot of different interactions with the public and really have a solid feel and understanding, historical understanding of our country, our Constitution, and why things are the way they're supposed to be, which again, from a conservative point of view, we're in a time where there's a lot of departure from some of this. And it's my passion that for a conservative, that you be able to identify why you're a conservative. I hope you walk away from the time that Larry and I have together being more informed about it, even if you don't agree with conservatism. At least you'll understand it from a different point of view. And we all won't be looking at each other saying, I don't want to be that person, or I don't want to be that guy, or I don't want to be like that lady. I just want to be who I am and have a good framework for why I believe what I believe. And that's really where I'm coming from at this. And Larry and I just have a great opportunity to contrast different worldviews, and there are going to be areas we align on, and there'll be areas that we don't. So, Larry, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Don. I have a law degree, didn't really study political science per se in law school or afterwards. So, better part of 3 decades in a courtroom, and about 4 or 5 years ago, actually, I was always in politics too. So I was a candidate 3 times. I was a political chair of my township committee. It happened to be Democratic committee. So I have walked in liberal circles, especially coming from Philadelphia. But I consider myself more moderate. I've been more exposed to liberal media, so I can really present that perspective for you. But I've moved more middle in my old age. So again, I've been a candidate 3 times, and part of my political path has taken me to starting a political news YouTube channel and then a social media group where I have not, Don, you have adopted that. Well, you're a conservative, and you take that, the Conservative Era is the name of your Facebook group. Me, I am more a scholar of studying the influence of the media, and I don't like what the right does to the right or the left does to the left. I don't like the power that the media has, and I think it sets good people like you and me apart, not you and me, because we take things from a more critical eye, if you will. But I think people have an antagonism that doesn't necessarily come from their difference in beliefs, but comes from a toxic media environment. So I'm not going to be I'll be taking that perspective because I think I have it, and I've been more exposed to that liberal side. But at the same time, I'm always going to find it more important that we at least describe our common ground and recognize that it's okay that we have a difference in opinion, because we're both Americans, and really what we all want is good government.
Well, amen on that. And let's segue into this week's topic. We, over the last number of years, have really become exposed to the media in a way that I think is different in history. And I say that because media traditionally has always been partisan. You can go back to the 1780s, running into the ratification of the Constitution in 1787. There were great men like Alexander Hamilton or James Madison. They started their own newspapers for the explicit purpose of of promoting their Federalist Papers so that they could persuade people to their point of view. So I think it's kind of naive for us to assume that the media has never been partisan and that this is something new. On one hand, it's not, but then on another hand, it is. And here, in my view, is where it is different. I don't believe we've ever seen a media that has so intentionally, so purposely, so willingly engaged in conversation about misinformation while putting misinformation out. And that's a worldview that I think many conservatives already share. And I think you can make a case for that by looking at a couple of different things. You could take a look at from 2017 through 2020, the way that the media treated President Donald Trump. Now, whether you're a Trump supporter or not isn't relevant to the conversation. What is relevant is to say that the media could have easily dug and find out that the Russian collusion hoax wasn't real. It was all there. It was always there that Hillary Clinton was behind it in the 2016 campaign. We spent $30 million on a Mueller investigation report to find out that, you know what, it didn't exist, which is something that a lot of us already knew. I think it's something that they already knew. The Democrats would run on Capitol Hill and say they've got all of this evidence when there was no evidence. You can look at the Biden-Hunter story. Right ahead of the 2020 presidential election, the New York Post puts all of this documentation out and the media comes and says, this is misinformation, it's not real and not true. Here we are 18 minutes later and the New York Times says they reviewed the laptop and it's legitimate and it's real. I mean, for goodness sake, they knew that ahead of the presidential election and chose to withhold that information. And you can go on and on and on about this stuff. I'll save some of this for later in the conversation, but Larry, from your point of view, how do you see some of this? Do you see that the media has kind of gone off of the rails a bit? Do you think that they're protecting Democrats too much? Do you think they're maybe attacking Republicans on purpose? Do you think that they are more objective and down the middle of the road?
Okay. Well, I am so glad that we've chosen this topic, especially to start. First, we have to define what we mean by the media. I remember using the term the media and somebody jumped on me because I didn't distinguish between conservative and liberal. So when you began your opening, you were, I know from reading your article that you were complaining about the quote unquote liberal media. And you could have been a number of political commentaries. Sorry about that. You could have been a number of political commentators who were complaining about the right if you left out all the specifics, because I can tell you we say the same thing. When I say we, I meant the liberal side of the media. And I don't think it's helpful for you and me to discuss who is quote unquote worse, but I can say who I think is more effective. And I think conservative media, what it tries to do, does it better, is more effective in influencing persuasively and getting people to buy in to their message and their talking points. And you know what, Don? I almost don't even want to bring up specifics because I don't want the issue to get in the way of the concept that both sides do it. And, I think it's not even necessarily helpful to say who does it better, but my gosh, I don't want to say who does it and when, because I don't want to fight with you about it. But I want you to say that, gosh, both sides are saying this equally loud.
Yeah, I hear that. I would definitely say that there are some elements in the conservative movement amongst the media that they go too far to the conspiracy side of things. They go too far into digging up and looking for something that may or may not exist. And it is just as polarizing and just as divisive as is what we would say that the mainstream media does, or big tech, meaning your Twitters, Facebooks, et cetera, that have really gotten into the censorship movement over the last 3 or so years. And so, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I think there's a balance that has to be struck on both sides. And I think that one, to be honest with you, is a reaction to the other, quite frankly.
Okay. that could be because liberal media was here earlier. And then you have a conservative movement. Was anyone before Buckley? Because I know he was considered one of the first and one of the best. And then
Probably not. William F. Buckley, who founded the National Review, is probably kind of the founder of the modern day conservative movement. And he used the National Review to help propel a lot of it.
So to the extent that you want to say that a lot of the conservative leaders, so we have Buckley, was anyone as big after Buckley as Rush Limbaugh? So I don't know. I'll defer to you on this. But if you want to say that they're a reaction, look, go ahead. Okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with that. They, the liberal media drew first blood. Conservatives have to fight back. Okay. You want to say? No,
I think, Larry, what I was really trying to say is I think that it has evolved into both sides equally trying to outdo the other side to frame a worldview.
Oh, yes. Okay. I don't disagree. But like, for instance, now just to go into details, and again, I'm going to try and really stay away from saying anything controversial, but let's talk about the media being unfair to Trump. It wasn't one of Trump's best his strongest points that he didn't have to pay for advertising, that he was able to beat 16, 15 other candidates because he knew how to manipulate that media, that unfairness, and what I think they were really dancing a very symbiotic waltz. So to suggest that, well, wait a minute, then they were too mean, but wait a minute, live by the media, die by the media. And I thought Trump was really a master at manipulating the media to get to where he was. So I think that's a double-edged sword when you talk about how unfair the media was to Trump. Go ahead, respond, please.
Well, I hear you, and I think you're right, especially in the 2016 campaign. He was masterful at getting who knows how many untold tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in free earned media. But I think that the switch changed once he did what they thought was the unbelievable in defeating Hillary Clinton. And it didn't take long for the de-evolution of the media to happen in terms of the way that they attempted to manhandle him, the way they attempted to discredit him, the way that they, for all use their words, colluded with Democrats to help try to bring him down on numerous occasions. Because even now you could look at President Biden and you can see how many in the media are talking about the problems that the president has with his son and financial corruption issues related to China, Ukraine, Russia, and other foreign nations where Biden clearly allowed his son to peddle his influence as the vice president of the United States for financial gain. And it's all there, but you're not hearing anything about this in the mainstream media. If you want to hear about it, you have to go to more conservative outlets to get that kind of data and information. They even went after the New York Post, who's been exposing this, saying that it was misinformation and disinformation. And, and I think that's where the crux of this is. I think both sides of the aisle, where I wanted to get back to, has dug in their political narrative instead of reporting objective truth.
There's a lot of truth to that. So let me just say how I address this issue in communicating with conservative voices in my social media platform. Because when the Post published the news about Hunter Biden, my response is, well, it's not fake news. It's fair news. There's nothing, inaccurate or wrong with what the media was saying about Hunter. But I thought, but wait a minute, when you put that next to President Trump, I always thought of it not as false, not as fake, but a non-story next to Trump and the corruption that was in the news about him and how he abused his office. I'm being deliberately vague because I think that everything the Democratic senators and congressmen, people who were worried about, or at least pursued the first impeachment, They thought that Trump was not fit for office because of his temperament. And what I always saw was, okay, Don, I know you as much, if not more than anyone, was outraged by the Democratic behavior in trying to impeach him the first time as being unfit, or at least maybe that motivated. And they said that they were doing it for a different reason. But I think the whole January 6th commission and what happened on January 6th actually bears out the whole concern that Democrats had, leadership had the whole time, that he was the type of person that would have started a war to keep himself in power. So I thought, just to go back to say what I was originally saying, I think it's true, and I agree with you. I think for the media to say it's not a story is disingenuous, or now say it's fake news, I think was wrong, but I don't think it was a story, and I don't think it was relevant during the election time. I do see how Biden is protected, and I was outraged by the fact that no one could say anything good that Trump was doing. And I started watching Bret Baier, The Five, in 2017 because I couldn't get away from toxic Trump talk. The only way to get away from it was to watch Fox, because I wanted to hear news and I didn't want to hear ranting and raving about how, as a friend of mine on my site says, orange-haired man bad. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I didn't want to hear it at all. So.
Oh, that's too funny. big bad orange man.
Orange man with orange hair bad. He said, that's all your arguments are.
You know, and I think
I appreciate the point.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of conservatives looking back in that era, I think it felt highly personal, the attacks on Trump, because in the media, especially the talking point media, maybe not necessarily on your 30-minute news broadcast in the evening on CBS, but certainly on MSNBC and CNN and in different publications, the Washington Post and others, you would see a lot of things where they would tie Trump to his voters and then accuse the voters of being racist because they voted for Trump. And wait a second, you guys are assigning motives for political gain here without knowing the voter that cast the ballot and why they cast the ballot. And I found that to be highly problematic and a continuation of that narrative that's still existing right now. If you stand up for parents' rights in schools, well, then you obviously you must be a racist because we have to think about these other things related to the Black and Hispanic and Asian community, of which I know in the Asian community, studies all show this is not an issue for them. They really don't think about things in terms of race like a lot of white and Black Americans do in particular. I don't know that Hispanics do either necessarily, but I do know that statistically that bears itself out with Asian community. Nonetheless, I think where I'm trying to go here is to say that the media has personalized this by assigning blame. I say the liberal media. And it's a dangerous road to go down, because once the media has lost its trust with 50% of the public, which it clearly has, then now we're in our silos. And now people like you and I probably very rarely ever speak to one another about any of these types of issues because we're tuckered in.
When you say the liberal media has called people racist, I don't see that. And I accept that you feel that way. And I'm not telling you how to feel. I have never heard, the most common complaint that I hear or that I see in the discussion pages by conservatives is saying, wait a minute, critical race theory is telling kids they're bad because they have white skin or they're racist. I don't see that. And I've never heard. There may be voices that misspeak or use poor choice of language, but as a whole, and I know that there has been some language that Trump supporters take his identity of some sort. So when discussing, let's go back to what you started with about Trump. I think there is a problem and there is huge division surrounding Trump because people didn't separate a good, strong platform from the man, because I think the man in a different country, Trump would be very much like Putin. He would have been like the guy in, forgive my ignorance, Venezuela, the Philippines. Trump loves dictators, and I think Trump would commit genocide for his fragile ego if his government would let him. He'd do it in a heartbeat. Now, that's what I think about the man. And I think his positions, and people, intelligent people, good Christians like yourself, adopt his platform for good conservative reasons. And you're right, there has been a blending, and it has set apart the country. And I see it. It bothers me. And that's the whole reason why I have my group and why I want to be on the show with you to discuss this, because we don't draw these lines of distinction. Because I see Trump has a real good platform in a lot of ways, but his messaging is, or the man and his messaging is what I have a problem with, not his platform. Actually, I don't think the public knew his platform for most of the time. I think it was more the messaging that a large portion of his followers embrace.
Yeah, I can tell you personally, this might come to a shocker for those watching who know me personally. If Trump chooses to run again in 2024 and Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, puts up a primary against him, I will wholeheartedly get behind DeSantis, because I think DeSantis has all of the policies, but he's got the gravitas, the political skills, the ability to communicate with people, whether you agree with him or not. He is very different animal than Donald Trump.
That should not be shocking. I don't know why you would think people would find that shocking. And I would think that that'd be a no-brainer and a very reasonable position. I would look at DeSantis closer. At least I would listen to him, because Trump, to me, I couldn't listen. Trump was an entertainer first.
Yeah.
And I believe he was enjoying himself in a lot of ways.
Well, I think he was too. I do too.
And I think he enjoyed the controversy. Don, I really do. I think he loved that clashing. Personality.
It kept him in the news. And I know that we're back to, that's where he intentionally knew how to use the media to keep himself front and center in the public eye. And there's good and there's bad to that. I think by the end of his 4 years, he had burned a lot of people out, even conservatives that loved his policies. I think they were burned out. I think there were a lot of Republicans that were embarrassed by January 6th. Yeah.
Like McConnell.
I think that myself, personally, I despised what happened on January 6th. I think it was wrong in every sense of the book, but I also understood people's sentiments and why they felt the way that they felt.
Why? I don't.
Okay. So this really is because of the media narrative that was driving all of this wedge, okay? If you go back and you Google Trump and racism and his supporters, or Trump supporters and racism, you will find articles in the media, in mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, there are numerous ones of them out there, the Chicago Tribune, where they were literally tying Trump to his voters in that way. They were denigrating the voter and tying the voter to the man, not just saying it, not just assuming it, but literally saying it. And I think by the time you get to January 6th, I think that this is an opinion. I can't prove this, but I'm going to state my opinion. Well, actually, maybe I can prove it. I think that Trump really honed in on what happened in the 2020 election, because if you think about what happened in the 2020 election, a lot of governors in Democratic states, you and I live in Pennsylvania, used the pandemic wisely for their political advantage. They even twisted their state constitutions to do it. Pennsylvania is one of those states. Just last month, the magistrate judge ruled that the mail-in are that the drop boxes were constitutionally illegal, as were the mail-in votes, because the state constitution explicitly lays out exactly how voting is to happen. And if you don't like it, then you go through the process to amend the state constitution, but you don't just ignore it. But a lot of judges, including the state Supreme Court, turned a blind eye to the state constitution because they felt that the pandemic should give people certain leeways to vote. Now, in Pennsylvania, because I'm so much more familiar with it than, say, Wisconsin, where the same thing happened, a judge in Wisconsin overturned these 500 boxes all over the state for the same reason. I think it lends to Trump's argument amongst conservatives that something didn't sit right when you have in Philadelphia massive voting centers where they wouldn't let people watch the voting. They put massive things over the windows so you couldn't observe them. And it just led to all kinds of questions. And I can tell you right now, Larry, I would bet you $1 million to none that if that had happened to people on the left, they would be in a bigger uproar than most conservatives were. They would be alleging all kinds of improprieties, and we know this is true. Look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia. She never conceded her 2018 gubernatorial election to Brian Kemp. She's still out there claiming that that election was rigged against her. So we can't just say that it was one person here, one person. It's all of them. But when you create the conditions where one party has control of a state that give the appearance of something, then that fuels an emotional state, and that emotional state got out of control amongst Republicans. And so maybe you have nothing really was wrong. But sometimes the perception of things can lend itself to all kinds of conspiracy theories. It seems to me that if you have nothing to hide, then open it up for everyone to see and be as transparent as you possibly can be. And that solves so many problems. But that's not what happened.
What's important is, first of all, I remember you being outraged about law changes because of COVID, and you were just as angry at Republicans for allowing it. So as long
especially Act 70, especially Act 77 in Pennsylvania, where it's a Republican-dominated legislature that passed and
but it passed it, and you were equally angry.
Yep.
So I think that that's an important point, that it was both sides. So you're not pointing at the left there; you're pointing at playing loose and goose with the Constitution, and I respect that, or I appreciate that point. Next point I want to make is I want to put on hold Stacey Abrams. I don't want to go far afield. You're covering a lot. No, I want to talk about it later, but let's just say focus for time purposes. But in Philadelphia, there was strong Republican minority presence in those counting. I think that the election commission head, Schmidt, if I have his name right, was a Republican, and saying, look, I've been watching the whole thing and things were on the level. You acknowledge, okay, maybe something didn't happen, but it was a perception issue. But, we're going to talk about perception.
And who created the perception?
Okay, hold on. Let's talk about that. What did Trump do leading up, but appoints someone head of mail-in and completely squeezes the U.S. mail? Now, forget that the May needed to have been cut back eventually, that it was running inefficiently. But before an election with COVID, Trump says, hey, let's squeeze the mail and then put deadlines on mail to come in. So you have that. I'm just saying, Don, what you're criticizing the left for, you have on both sides there. So
yeah, but I'd like you to point out to me or find a source for me that said Trump did that. Now, I will grant it to you that the Postmaster General is a Trump supporter, and he was the one driving all of those policies. So, but I would challenge us to say that Trump did that. He didn't, not directly anyway. Not that we know of anywhere did he instruct anything like that, because he doesn't have that authority over the Postal Service.
But I'm sure when he appointed him, he demanded loyalty and someone who would have, quote unquote, have his back.
No different than political parties do that in our states. And that was going on here with Democrats in Pennsylvania.
Well, again, remember what I stand for is that this is something in both sides do almost at all times. So
yeah, I agree.
I don't want our listeners, conservative or liberal, for either one, something that either one of us say, to get angry, but realize how much room there is to connect here.
Yeah.
That we really haven't. I don't think I ever disagree with anything that you say in its narrow tunnel. I just say, but wait a minute, you're only talking, you are being a good conservative, worried about good sound conservative principles, talking to other good conservatives. But I would like someone with your skill and talent to write to everyone, because you could be a real difference maker and a difference changer. And I understand what you would say, that wait a minute though, conservatism is the way to go. So that's my audience and that's my voice. But why I'm glad to be here is that you are so careful to acknowledge the other side too, and everything that you write and everything that you say. So I'm just more focused, certainly not on the left. And I'm persuaded by what you say on the right. And I'd really like to see us all act as one.
And that's fair. What I was asking a moment ago, looking back at Philadelphia, is what drove the perception. Believe it or not, it wasn't necessarily Trump. It was the media.
But what was the perception?
The perception of they were the ones that were showing all of the stuff going up over the windows. They were the ones that were helping to fuel some of Trump's narrative, quite frankly, that the election was rigged, because they almost in a way reinforced it in the conservative mind. Trump said this, wait a second, there's his attorneys, there they are putting up boards over the windows, there they are doing all of this stuff. Wait a second, right? So, and the media didn't bother to try to set a narrative straight. They didn't try to interview the Democrats to ask them, why are you doing this? Why aren't you why aren't you following state law, allowing the judge ruled a 10-foot, okay, it's normally 6 foot because of COVID, she said 10 feet. Why aren't you allowing that injunction? Why aren't you enforcing that injunction and allowing the 10 feet observation? Instead, you're still not allowing anyone in there. There was a whole bunch of stuff that the media wasn't asking. Instead, they were so busy focused on Trump that they left out a whole bunch of other stuff that in the conservative media, they're starting to point out, and then everybody settles into their boxes.
So look, this is a perfect example of a microcosm of how what you may say on a narrow, limited issue, I won't necessarily take an issue with. But the problem is you're pulling this story out of a much larger, stronger narrative that conservatives en masse, there's something like 80 to 90% Republicans believe the election was fraudulent and stolen by Democrats in face of no evidence. God, to me, that's a strong, and it started what happened on September 6th. To me, that's the story. And for you to focus, what you might be saying is true, but gosh, done in the face of this larger, huge thing that happened, and let's not give it a label, but something that was embarrassing to both of us on January 6th. Let's call it just embarrassing. Something that was really embarrassing at a monumental capacity that really divided and splintered, especially in light of 80% of Republicans that say, as a matter of fact, the election was stolen and Trump may have been justified. And many Republicans say there's no evidence of that.
Can I share with you that that's a media narrative that's a falsity? And here's why.
That Republicans believe.
And by 80% of them think that the election was rigged.
Don't hold me to the number, but the vast majority.
Well, okay. That's really not necessarily that's the perception. That's not necessarily the fact because of the way the polls are asking the questions. What is really happening amongst conservatives is you talk to most of us, we all admit we don't know what happened. We don't know that it was rigged. We don't know that it wasn't rigged. We don't know. And so where we're sitting at is we're back to the perception of things leads to the possibility that it was. And if the government isn't going to be fully transparent, as they should be, then that leaves people in a position where they question without fact whether something is true or not. And that's why I said that earlier. And that is where the majority of Republicans actually sit, is that we want to believe. Look, I'm a veteran. I served in the Navy for 4 years, active duty. I was a chaplain in the Army. I want to believe with all my heart my government is on the uppity up. But I'm looking at the divisions in it. I look at Obama in 2012? I think when the IRS was allowed, no, it's 2010, when the IRS was allowed to weaponize itself against conservative Tea Party groups that just wanted to raise money so that they could put their constitutional right to the First Amendment free speech.
I don't want to do what about it. Let's just stay focused.
No, but I want you to see the narrative that can be built up over time where you see these things happen. And then later, the IRS will admit, yes, that should not have happened. We should not have done that. That was wrong. And you come back around to different things under Obama. You come back around under Trump. You come around to Biden right now and look what he's trying to do with him saying voting rights are diminished and calls them racist and Jim Crow. And when that's not true at all. Or you look at the Don't Say Gay bill, the way that they're characterizing that Florida bill, which isn't true at all. It simply says if you're from kindergarten to third grade, we don't want you talking about sex with kids.
So if you want a laundry list, Republican grievances, that could be a topic of a show. I mean, I actually wouldn't mind discussing that with you.
Yeah, but I think the reason why I bring all of these up, Larry, is just to say, because it comes back to a lot of the way the media presents the information. And that is where the problem for me is at. Now, if they were,
I would agree with you there. I actually would rather watch Bayer. I would rather watch Chris Wallace than any other, as we'll call it, liberal media Sunday show or evening show. So we agree there.
Every morning I watch Morning Joe on MSNBC. I'm reading this book right now that's fascinating.
Wait a minute, Morning Joe, isn't he a little too liberal now, though?
Oh yeah, he went out there in the left. He's gone.
What are you watching the show for? Just to get your balance, you mean?
Well, yeah. You can't really understand what the other side's positions are if you don't objectively listen to them.
That's why I watch The Five. Right. I want to hear what Greg and Jesse say.
This book is fantastic.
Okay.
Getting the Left Right. This is by a liberal scholar who wrote about the transformation, decline, and reformation of American liberalism. And he's talking about where its strengths and weaknesses are, more potently talking about its weaknesses. And even he is coming around to some of the things that I'm saying, that the liberal movement in America could have positioned itself for some incredible things, and it ended up losing the battle because of its narratives.
All right,
which all get flushed through the media.
Well, all right. So the one thing I want to say is, when you say we don't know what happened, I want to get back to the 2020 election. We know as much as we know what happened in 2016 and 2000, and in 1980 and all those elections. They were all pretty similar. Now, you may say COVID caused more mail-in, but the election wasn't that close this time to suggest that it was the difference in win. The only difference this election is Trump, when he was told he was going to lose well in advance of the election, said, okay, we have to get this narrative going. And it creates, now that's Trump was conservative media with him and Fox and Hannity and Tucker. So this is where the hair on my neck gets rubbed the wrong way when you say the liberal media. We have conservative media that has its own version of doing the same thing.
Larry, I hear you. I think on that issue, we're going to agree to disagree. And this is what we hope to show people, is how to have these conversations without getting emotional, without yelling at one another, without denigrating each other. I think you can, as time goes along, we're starting to see a different picture than we saw even a year ago. Again, you see judges that are saying states violated their constitutions.
But again, you're still talking about separation of power, but conservatives did that two.
No. These
Now, what
were,
are you
this
referring
happened
to?
in Wisconsin. This happened in Pennsylvania. The ballot box, for
But
example,
again, you just
those
said
were
that.
unconstitutional. Now,
But it was
how
a
many?
Pennsylvania conservative-dominated legislature.
Look, that's absolutely right. I'm telling you right now, I'm not voting for a single Republican that voted for Act 77 in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to put it out here on social media too, because I counted my state senator as one of my good friends and I consulted with him. And when I found out that he was one of the sponsors behind Act 77, that ended our professional relationship. Because the first thing I said to him is, do you realize what you just did? This was in February of 2019 when I found this out. Do you realize what you have done? Also, you could get this other thing over here. You compromised the wrong thing.
Okay, you always have good points, but remember, you are making partisan arguments and you're criticizing the legislature for something that was done bipartisan.
But the ballot box issue was done by a Democratic governor and his administration. That's part of the point. That is a separate issue from the mail-in. Okay, the mail-in part was legitimate because Act 70, well, I say it was legitimate where Act 77 was concerned. It's illegitimate because it breaks the state constitution. But the ballot boxes themselves that were placed all over the state for people to just drive up and drop theirs into, we just saw a video in Lehigh Valley. They just put this out last week. There was hundreds of people that walked up with 10 and 15 different ballots in their hand. They even flamed them out, opened it up, and inserted them in there. That is a violation of state law. You are only allowed to put your ballot in that box, nobody else's. So again, you create perception problems. Did they cheat on the surface of it? Absolutely, they did. Does that mean that they put people's ballots in there that people believe that they were voting appropriately? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that at all. But do you see where I'm going?
I do, and I want to explain it, and maybe we can close on this because we're getting a little long. But I want to say one thing that you do bring to my attention is that perhaps Republicans or minority, when I say minority, I mean, 45% to 55% registered voters. I could see how Republicans or conservatives can be concerned when there's fewer in number about election integrity generally. When you have fewer watchdogs in a given location, you must be concerned that everything in highly partisan times, that something could go wrong, and so that you want strict controls. And I could see how you would feel that way. And so I appreciate your perspective there.
And even with that, Larry, if they knew they had these videos of what went on in Lehigh Valley, why are they waiting 18 months later to reveal it?
I don't know.
They knew that the day after it happened.
Well, still, this is the amount of numbers that we're talking about is a paucity compared to the margin of victory that Biden had. So I wouldn't get upset about it.
And that's where we say we don't know, because just theoretically extrapolate it out. If one person brings 15 ballots, and let's say they know that 100 people brought 15 ballots, how many ballots is that? So now that's just one voting location.
You want to run numbers, it's fine. But let me just suggest to you, look, with how Trump has behaved since this has happened, don't you feel that there's some justice in not having him in power, seeing what someone out of control could do, like Putin, to the world? Would you really continue to want him to have that much power when you have so many people signing?
So to your point, what war did Trump start?
Oh, but aren't we lucky?
No, it's
a fair point. I get your point. If you want to go look at the 4 years, you can say it was prosperity. I get that. But I'm just saying that, was he fit for office?
Well, look.
Is his temperament and personality, Don, someone you want?
When I voted for Donald Trump, I'm not going to speak for all conservatives and Republicans. I'm going to speak for myself. And then we'll up here. When I voted for Donald Trump, I knew who he was. He'd been in the spotlight for 30 years. He was a billionaire, playboy, philanthropist who threw his money around. He was probably corrupt in New York City with a lot of his business dealings that went down. We all knew that.
Not a philanthropist.
What's that?
Not a philanthropist, philanderer.
Okay, well, we'll give you that too.
Okay, right.
No problem. Those are all true things.
Carnegie, Rockefeller, philanthropists, not Donald Trump.
Well, we all know who Donald Trump was for 30 years. We weren't voting for an angel, and we knew it. What we were voting for was somebody who had the guts and the gravitas to go in there and say, I am going to go in there and drain that swamp because it's a mess. Right? And it was a great narrative. It was such great talking points.
His administration was, I said his message was beautiful. I said that.
I'm only talking about that.
And
I'm talking about 2016 here. I'm not talking about what happens the preceding 4 years.
His administration was swampy.
Drained
and filled.
And in some instances, I agree with you.
He went right down off that stage after saying drain it and laughed and said, okay, let's fill the swamp. So, but the messaging, you're right. We agree.
I'm on the same page with you.
Okay.
I know, because when I was working on my master's and I was in DC all the time, I met a lot of these people.
But Don, when you say he had the guts, he didn't have the guts. He
had the guts to say what others wouldn't. Now, again, we're back to how he was really good at using the media.
All right.
Right? I mean, so I'm not saying it was right or wrong what he did the next 4 years. I'm only looking at that 2016 moment when he was saying what nobody else in the Republican circles would say, because it's sanctimonious to say that we have people serving in government that shouldn't be there in the bureaucracy. And that's true. There are people there that probably shouldn't be there, but that's true of any profession. And it's true of anywhere you work. I mean, so I don't want to, and I certainly do not want to denigrate the overwhelming majority of government workers who are there doing their best for the country every day. They're there. I've met them. I know some of them. Okay. There are really good people working in government.
Don, I want to say that while it's still late, I could speak to you till midnight, nonstop, and not even breathe, and still be entertained and still be having a good discussion.
Look, it was a great time, Larry. I know we went probably way over what we wanted to.
We'll be challenged to keep it short every time.
Every week. And it's going to be fun. And I'm looking forward this next week to see what you come up with. Now, I picked this topic. We're going to kind of alternate for the audience what we talk about from different viewpoints. And I promise not to take over and hijack your.
That's okay. Can I choose from your writings that you post? Can I choose topics from your list?
Anything you want. But I have one reservation I'd like to do within the next couple of weeks. I'd like to have a conversation about the difference between equity and equality.
All right, let's do it next time.
Do it next time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, very good. Don, thanks for having me today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. I hope you stayed with us to the end, and we look forward to seeing you every week till the end of time as we have a great time debating these issues together.
Until next time.